Before Clara Bishop climbed back up those stairs, before she filed her report and watched the city quietly bury it, she stood in a room that should not have existed under a burned-out textile mill on Chicago's near South Side, and she understood, in the flat, wordless way a person understands a gunshot before they hear it, that she was the first living soul to stand there in longer than anyone could account for. That was October 9th, 1889. Rain had soaked the city for 6 straight days, running grey down the tin awnings and pooling in the wagon ruts, and Clara pulled her collar tight and checked the address on her clipboard one more time before she went in. She was 27, a structural surveyor for the city's Board of Structural Review, the only woman on staff who carried her own set of calipers. And she'd learned to read a building from her father, a stonemason who lost 2 fingers to a collapsing lintel in 74, and never let her forget that load-bearing walls tell the truth, and everything else is just dressing. Her job that week was routine: walk the 6 condemned blocks near the old drainage canal that long-time residents called the Hearthstone Flats, and mark what could be saved before the wrecking crews came through. 11 buildings down that month already. Rotted joists, a cracked foundation on Halstead that had dropped a cornice 2 feet from a kid's skull the week before she got there. Nothing prepared her for the last building on her list. A 3-story husk on Corbin Street, the old tenants had called the Halverson Mill, boarded up and dark for 9 years. She found the sub-basement stairs behind a collapsed loom frame, buried under pigeon droppings and decades of dust. And the second, she put her hand on the wall to steady herself, she knew something was wrong with it. No mortar lines. No tool marks. Stone worn smooth down the centre of every step, the way a church staircase wears smooth after 100 years of feet, except this staircase was supposed to be new. She counted 41 steps by lantern light, and somewhere around the 30th the damp basement cold gave way to something drier, something with a faint metal bite to it, like the air right after lightning hits close. She told herself it was nerves. She kept walking. At the bottom, her lantern threw its small, shaking circle of light against a wall, and then the wall simply wasn't there anymore, and the light kept going and going into a dark that swallowed it whole. She stood in that doorway a long moment, breath fogging in air 10 degrees colder than the stairwell, and felt the particular certainty that comes to someone who has spent her whole life reading buildings for a living. Whatever this room was, it hadn't been built to hold looms. She stepped inside anyway. Her footsteps came back to her wrong, thin and delayed, bouncing off a ceiling she couldn't see. And when she lifted the lantern higher, she saw the walls weren't bare. Shapes stood out of the dark, evenly spaced, deliberate, running farther than her light could follow. And her first thought was storage vault, some forgotten company stock left behind when the mill went up on top of it. Her second thought, the one that stuck with her long after she climbed back up those 41 steps into the rain, was that nothing about that room felt forgotten. It felt kept. Like the dust coating every inch of the mill above had simply never been let in downstairs. What Clara found under Corbin Street never made it into a single official record, and that's exactly the kind of story that dies fast unless somebody keeps carrying it forward. Stories like this one don't get pushed to you by an algorithm. Nobody's boosting a 130-year-old whisper about a room under a rail yard, which means the only way it survives is the old way, one person telling another. So if you want more of these, the true local legends nobody ever wrote down, The best thing you can do is subscribe and turn your notifications on so the next one finds you the way this one found somebody, passed hand to hand instead of buried and forgotten. Now, back to the Hearthstone Flats, and the room Clara Bishop found kept waiting in the dark. The room got a name eventually, the way these things do, passed down through 3 generations of Chicago record clerks, who called it the Hollow, and the numbers attached to it read less like folklore and more like a surveyor's fever dream. 412 feet from the stairwell to the far wall, 31 feet of open ceiling at the highest point, ribbed with stone arches that met at a centre line like the hull of a ship turned upside down, and not one support column anywhere in the space. Nothing holding up 30 feet of stone and packed earth except those arches, which by 1889 standards shouldn't have been possible without steel, nobody could find down there. Set into both side walls at 9-foot intervals were 46 shallow niches, and each one held a coil of blackened metal, not copper, not quite bronze either, wound tight and fused straight into the stone like it had grown there instead of being hammered in. Clara's surviving notes describe them exactly that way, seated in the wall rather than built into it. Augustus Pryor, the district registrar who filed the first petition about the site, went back down twice more before it was sealed. And both times he brought a different witness along so his word wouldn't have to stand alone. One of those witnesses was a canal inspector named Rufus Halloway, and his statement only survived because his granddaughter kept it folded inside a family Bible for 60 years. Halloway described a low hum coming off the coils whenever more than 3 people stood in the room together, and by his own rough count, with no real instrument to measure it, he put it somewhere near 60 pulses a second. His words, copied down by his granddaughter exactly as he gave them, felt it in my teeth before I heard it in my ears, and I did not care for it one bit. He also swore the hum cut off dead the second anyone laid a hand on the black disc at the far end, like the whole room answered to that one stone and nothing else. Running along the east wall was a stretch locals came to call the Whispering Wall, 200 feet of smooth, curved stone that carried sound with almost no loss, end to end. Clara tested it herself, said her own name into the stone at one end, and 30 seconds later heard it come back to her from the far side, word for word in a voice she swore afterward was not an echo. At the end of the hall stood a raised dais, and set into the centre of it, a disc of black basalt about 6 feet across. No seams, no tool marks, cold under her bare palm even in a room that already held the mineral chill of any Chicago basement in October. She wrote that the surface felt worn the way riverstone gets worn, smoothed down over centuries, which made no sense next to a room that otherwise looked sealed for a few decades at most, and there was no dust on it. Every other surface down there, the floor, the niches, the ribs overhead, wore a fine grey coat consistent with decades of stale air. The disc alone was clean, like something had been resting on it, or moving across it, far more recently than anything else in that room had any right to be touched. The first mention of any of this outside Clara's own papers ran in a 4-page weekly called The Hearthstone Ledger on November 3rd, 1889, buried on page 3 under 12 lines of type, reporting that District Registrar Augustus Pryor had petitioned the municipal board for clarification regarding what the item called an unlisted subterranean structure of considerable size beneath Corbin Street. As far as anyone has ever traced, that petition got no public answer of any kind. A generation later, a Blackwood Institute acoustics scholar named Professor Emmeline Foss took an interest in what by then had passed into second-hand family folklore. She never found the site itself. By her time, nobody left alive could say for certain where the entrance had even been. But she spent years collecting testimony from Chicago families who claimed some tie to the Hearthstone Flats, and her private notes call the Whispering Walls acoustics inconsistent with any 19th century building method she knew of, and frankly, inconsistent with most that came after it. She cross-checked 11 separate family accounts before she gave up trying to publish anything formal, and 9 of those 11 brought up, without her ever prompting it, the same detail: a faint copper taste in the air, noticeable within the first few minutes underground and gone within moments of coming back up. She never explained it. Her one surviving letter on the subject, addressed to a colleague at a Michigan college who never wrote back, says as much in plain terms. Chicago's always been a city that builds right on top of itself. Walk through Bridgeport or Pilsen today, and you'll find sidewalks poured over sidewalks, foundations stacked on foundations, whole stretches of the 19th century, sitting 12 or 20 feet under whatever you're standing on now. That's part of why this story stuck around a neighbourhood, instead of dying out with the people who first told it. Folks who grew up near the old drainage canal still tell their kids about the Hearthstone hum, a low vibration some claim to feel through a manhole cover or a storm grate on a quiet night, usually somewhere along the old rail corridor. Nobody's ever recorded it. Nobody's ever proven it's anything but an old freight tunnel settling in the cold. One woman who grew up 2 blocks off Corbin Street, whose families lived there since before the depot went in, put it about as plain as anyone has. My grandfather used to say, "Don't stand on the 3rd grate, past the corner after midnight." And he never once told me why, and I never once asked. That's most of what's left of it now. No book carried this story forward. No historical marker points to Corbin Street. And yet it's still getting handed down block to block the way. A good dare you story moves through a neighbourhood, mouth to mouth, whether or not anybody ever wrote a word of it down. There's a smaller piece of it that rarely gets told anymore. Older residents near the rail corridor used to claim you could spot the manhole covers sitting above hum territory by the frost pattern on them come winter, a thin ring around the outer edge that never quite matched the rest of the street. Whether that was ever true, or something the story just picked up along the way, nobody left around Corbin Street can say for certain anymore. The official record on what happened next is thin, and what's left of it doesn't agree with itself. Clara's original survey notes, the ones describing the room in her own hand, were logged as received by the Municipal Board on October 14, 1889. 5 days later, a small fire broke out in the board's records annex, and by the department's own account, it destroyed a limited quantity of recent field submissions. Her report was among them. Her personnel file tells a flatter story than the one that survived in the neighbourhood. On November 20th, 1889, she was pulled off field survey work entirely and moved to administrative filing, a real step down for someone with her training, and the write-up filed against her by a supervisor whose name is lost now, cited irregularities and unsupported claims in recent structural assessments. The Corbin Street site was sealed under a board directive the following spring and logged in the property record with 4 words: structurally unsound, access restricted. Clara left the board for good in the spring of 1891. Family letters that surfaced decades later at an estate sale, say she spent the next few years putting together her own private account of what she'd seen. Measurements, sketches, statements from Augustus Pryor and a couple others who claimed some tie to the site. She brought that account to 2 different Chicago papers, in 1893 and again in 1894. Both turned her down. One editor's rejection letter, kept by her family for years, told her flat out that the paper did not print speculation dressed up as survey work. None of it ever ran. She moved out to rural Wisconsin around 1898, married a dairy farmer, and by every account that exists, never spoke about the Hearthstone Flats again in public. The one exception on record is a letter to her niece in 1929, where she wrote only that she still dreamed sometimes of a hum she could feel in her teeth before she could hear it, and that she supposed she always would. She died in 1934 at 72, buried under a plain granite marker with her name, her dates, and nothing else. No mention of the board. No mention of Corbin Street. The Halverson mill itself came down in 1897 for a freight depot, which was later replaced by a self-storage facility that still stands on the block today. If anything's still down there, the arched ceiling, the 46 niches, the whispering wall, the black disc, nobody living has ever confirmed it, and the Hearthstone Flats got swallowed so thoroughly into the surrounding neighbourhoods that most people who live there now have never once heard the name. Every city's got its own version of the Hearthstone Flats, buried somewhere underneath it. A room nobody can find on a map anymore. A name half remembered by people whose grandparents swore it was real. A file that happened to burn at a convenient moment. History doesn't always disappear because somebody erases it. Sometimes it just gets built over, one foundation at a time, until the version everybody's standing on is the only one anybody thinks to ask about. Nobody alive has ever gone back down those 41 steps and come up with an answer. What's left is a hum some people say they still feel through a storm grate on a quiet night. A family Bible with a canal inspector's statement folded inside it, and a granite marker in Wisconsin that never once mentions Corbin Street. If this one got under your skin even a little, pass it along to somebody. Just one person is enough. A story like this doesn't survive because it's written down anywhere. It survives because somebody decided it was worth carrying to the next person. Until next time, keep an eye on the shadows.